When I was a teen, I was very afraid of nuclear war. I was pretty much convinced it would be how I would die. And later in life, about 15 years later, when I had my spiritual awakening, I had other signs that maybe I had died in a war in a previous life, and that may have been something that triggered these fears. I also put much too much credence in the film War Games, and also there was a mini-series called The Day After, I believe, I think that was its title, about nuclear war. And it just really spiraled. And for a time period, I lived near Dow Chemical, in a town near Dow Chemical in Midland, Michigan. And I had heard that it was a secondary target if there was a full-scale nuclear war and so forth. So that really fed into my fears. And so often, if I heard at night low-flying plane going into the Midland airport or whatever, I would fear that it was a missile. And so I, to comfort myself, would reach back and turn on my clock radio and hear some songs, and I figured, well, that's a good sign. I'll just wait for the little time to pass. I figured there would be some kind of warning if there was an actual nuclear attack that would be broadcast immediately across the nation on radio stations. So that was my way of comforting myself if I heard low-flying planes. And I did this one for probably, I was in the habit of doing this for at least a couple years. And this fear, the energy behind this fear, eventually seemed to attract this following experience, and there was some synchronicity involved with it as well. So one night, middle of the night, my family was all asleep. I heard a low-flying plane, and as usual, I reached back and turned on the radio, but there was nothing there but static. And then I switched through various channels and couldn't find anything. Everything was just static. And so I began to get panicky. And then I finally found a station, and it had a song. I can't remember the name of the song, but it was like, the lyrics were, "Things ain't what they used to be, radiation in the air." And I was like, oh wow, this is like the station manager just flipped on this song as kind of a swan song. I had myself convinced this was it, and then they knew it was it too. They knew that a nuclear attack had begun from Russia, and so that was how they were saying goodbye, was with that song, and everything else was just static. And I thought, well, maybe they got the other stations or whatever. And I just decided, well, this is it. And I went into, for the first time ever, and the only time since, I've never had this happen since then, a feeling of surrendering to death. And in remembering this, I thought about how, when an animal is attacked, they go into, at a certain point, a place of surrender, where, let's say, the antelope is attacked by the lion, and at some point the antelope just goes limp and just surrenders, and is like, this is it. And on an emotional level, that's how I felt. And all that fear that I had helped convince me that that was what was happening. I had feared this for so long that it had finally, in my mind, occurred. So I was just going to lay there and wait for the nuclear flash. And but then I remembered my sister was in the basement. She had a friend over, and they were downstairs. So I had this feeling like, well, I don't want to just, if she survives, I don't want her to be alone for the initial survival phase. So I got up, and I went to tell my mom, we need to go downstairs. There's a nuclear attack. And she was like, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, I'm serious. Turn on the radio. And she turned it on, and there's a station. I said, flip through the stations. And it was all just normal radio chatter, and there was nothing going on and so forth. And I eventually just realized, like, oh, wow, this isn't happening. So I went from this state of numbness and surrender and just feeling the inevitability of my own death to just, I started crying and releasing all of these years of fear that had built up about nuclear Armageddon and so forth. And then when I went back to my bedroom, I saw that what happened was that when I reached back for the volume button, I'd also switched it from FM to AM, and there were hardly any AM stations in that area, so that's why I got all the static. And it was just pure synchronicity and coincidence that the one station I could get in was lyrics about radiation in the air. And in reflecting on why that all happened the way it did, I like to think that in tasting death in that instance, even though I was never really in jeopardy, to feel what it's like to surrender to death, I kind of know what that's like now, and always have since then. And I was an atheist at the time as a kid, and later on in life, when I became more spiritual, became interested in ideas such as in the Celestine Prophecy, they talk about the merging between the spiritual and physical realms. And I became interested in concepts related to longevity, physical immortality, perpetualism, whatever you want to call it, and decided I wanted to live until there was that merge between the physical and spiritual realms. And I feel now, in having tasted death, that allows me to not need it again, if that makes sense. Because I want to have the full spectrum of human experience, and that experience taught me what I do not want. And I can die still, you know. I'm not, like, terrified of the concept of death, and I could be wrong. But in terms of what I feel I've been guided to believe and move towards, I would like to continue to live. I would like to continue to stay healthy and keep on keeping on. So that experience also taught me that if you put enough fear towards something, you eventually experience it in some level or another. And I believe there is a kind of buffer. So it's not like just if you see a movie about somebody, a home invasion, and you hear something in the middle of the night after seeing this movie, and you're afraid, it's not like you're going to track the experience right away. Or if you fear that you're feeling uncomfortable in your body in some way and you imagine that it's some serious disease or so forth, again, it doesn't have to be this instant manifestation thing. In fact, for a long time, I was having like a third eye opening about 15 years ago. It was very intense, and I had a lot of pain in that area. And so for a long time, I feared that I was having I had a brain tumor or something like that. And I did find out eventually it's common when someone is becoming intuitive and having an opening that there's pain involved and so forth. But I really did fear having a brain tumor for a long time, like at least probably 2 years, until the pain started to subside. And it wasn't like achy, really painful, but it was just kind of a gnawing, kind of raw sensation that made me concerned. So I was afraid that fearing it would attract it. So I didn't want to be afraid of it, but I did. But so it's not like everything we're afraid of we attract, but I do believe that sometimes if we are meant to have some kind of an experience related to fear, then it can help us to overcome the fear by facing it on some level. So again, I was never in any real jeopardy of being annihilated by a nuclear bomb, but I feared that I was, and then facing it, I think the fear started to dissipate after that. I don't remember it continuing much longer, even though the Cold War went on for at least 6 years after that. So yeah, that was my experience with attracting what I feared, in a sense, and I appreciate you listening to the story.